A lookout stood on a rocky headland as the first light of dawn spread across the sea. For a moment, everything seemed calm. Then dark shapes began to emerge from the morning mist. One sail appeared, then another, then 10 more. Soon the horizon itself seemed covered with ships. Longships advanced in formation, their dragon-headed prows cutting through the water. Shields lined their sides. Warriors crowded the decks. Supply vessels moved among the warships, carrying food, equipment, and weapons. What appeared at first to be a fleet slowly revealed itself as something much larger. An army was arriving by sea. For the people watching from shore, that realization was terrifying. Most medieval rulers understood how armies moved. Armies marched along roads. They followed rivers. They traveled slowly. Their routes could often be predicted. The Vikings changed that reality. Their ships allowed warriors to appear where enemies least expected them. A force could cross open water, enter a river system, travel deep inland, and strike targets that believed themselves protected by distance. Regions that seemed secure suddenly found themselves exposed. What made this possible was not a single battle or a single king. It was the Longship. Built with overlapping wooden planks and designed for both sail and oar power, Viking ships combined speed, flexibility, and range in ways that few rivals could match. Their shallow draft allowed them to travel through rivers and coastal waters where larger vessels struggled to operate. A coastline was no longer a defensive barrier. It became a potential route of invasion. Across Scandinavia, shipbuilders worked constantly. Forests provided timber. Blacksmiths forged thousands of iron nails. Carpenters shaped hulls beside fjords and sheltered bays. Every completed vessel expanded the reach of its owner. At first, these ships carried small groups of raiders, but success encouraged ambition. Each voyage proved that warriors could travel farther than before. Each expedition revealed new opportunities. Each victory encouraged leaders to think bigger. Without fully realizing it, Viking rulers were creating a military revolution. The ships that once carried raiders would eventually carry entire armies. And once that transformation began, the political map of Northern Europe would never be the same. The transformation did not happen overnight. It happened one ship at a time. One successful voyage encouraged another. One profitable expedition funded a larger one. One ambitious leader inspired his rivals to think on an even greater scale. Soon, Viking rulers were no longer asking how far a ship could travel. They were asking how many ships they could gather. Picture a great harbor during the height of summer. Long ships fill the water from one end of the bay to the other. Carpenters repair damaged hulls. Blacksmiths sharpen weapons. Warriors arrive from distant settlements carrying shields, spears, axes, and supplies. Messengers move constantly between commanders. The harbor feels less like a port and more like a military camp preparing for war. Because that is exactly what it has become. A single ship could conduct a raid. 10 ships could threaten a coastline. 100 ships could transport an army. And armies could change kingdoms. The larger these fleets became, the more organization they required. Ships needed crews. Crews needed supplies. Supplies needed planning. Kings who wished to command great fleets depended on alliances with jarls, regional leaders, and powerful supporters willing to contribute ships and warriors. Gathering a fleet became a demonstration of political power as much as military strength. By the late 10th century, some rulers were commanding forces so large that contemporaries could barely comprehend them. One of the most dramatic examples involved Harald Bluetooth. Later sources credit the Danish king with mobilizing around 600 ships while intervening in Norwegian political struggles. Whether the exact figure was perfectly accurate matters less than what it represents. Hundreds of vessels gathering for a single campaign meant thousands of warriors, enormous logistical demands, and a ruler capable of coordinating one of the largest military operations Northern Europe had yet seen. Imagine standing on the shore as fleet after fleet arrives. Sails fill the horizon. Warriors crowd every deck. The sea itself seems transformed into a moving army. At that moment, the purpose of the fleet had fundamentally changed. These ships were no longer transporting warriors. They were becoming the warriors' battlefield, supply network, and highway all at once. The floating army had arrived, and its greatest victory still lay ahead. The true power of the floating army became clear when fleets stopped supporting wars and started deciding them. One of the most dramatic examples unfolded at Svolder. Picture a calm sea beneath a gray northern sky. Waves roll gently against the hulls of waiting warships. Crews move quietly across crowded decks. Warriors check shields and weapons. Commanders scan the horizon. Somewhere beyond sight, a king is approaching, and a trap is waiting for him. Olaf Tryggvason had risen to power in Norway and established himself as one of the most influential rulers in the region. But powerful enemies had spent months building a coalition against him. Danish rulers, Swedish rulers, and Norwegian rivals all shared the same objective: remove Olaf. To achieve that goal, they assembled an overwhelming fleet. Historical accounts describe more than 70 ships participating on the coalition side. Against such numbers, Olaf faced terrible odds, yet he continued sailing directly toward the danger waiting ahead. When the fleets finally met, the sea became a battlefield. Warships closed the distance. Crews hurled spears and arrows. Ships locked together. Warriors crossed from deck to deck as the fighting became a brutal infantry battle floating on water. Every vessel became a fortress. Every plank became contested ground. Victory no longer depended solely on courage. It depended on organization, numbers, leadership, and the ability to deploy military power across the sea. When the battle ended, Olaf was gone. Norway's future had changed. A kingdom had effectively been decided by fleets. That was the moment the floating army revealed its true potential. These were no longer raiding forces searching for wealth. They were instruments capable of making and destroying kings. And rulers across northern Europe were paying attention. During the 11th century, Viking fleets reached a scale that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. What began as mobility was becoming domination. Picture hundreds of ships moving together across open water. The fleet stretches from horizon to horizon. Warships lead the formation. Supply vessels follow behind. Warriors stand shoulder to shoulder along crowded decks while commanders coordinate movements across enormous distances. The fleet resembles a moving kingdom. This was the world of Cnut the Great. His rise demonstrated what became possible when powerful rulers combined political ambition with overwhelming naval strength. Fleets carried armies across seas and connected territories that would otherwise have remained isolated from one another. Campaigns could begin in one kingdom and influence events in another. Entire regions became battlefields because ships made large-scale movement possible. The same reality appeared at Helga. There, rulers from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden participated in a struggle involving enormous fleets. Historical accounts describe hundreds of vessels operating within a single conflict. Rivers, coastlines, and waterways became strategic zones where naval power directly influenced political outcomes. Meanwhile, the influence of Viking fleets extended westward. Dublin had become one of the most important Viking centers in the Irish Sea world. Ships connected Ireland, the Isles, and Scandinavia through networks of trade, communication, and military cooperation. When major conflicts erupted, warriors could arrive from distant regions with remarkable speed. This reality became visible at Clontarf. Forces connected by maritime networks participated in one of the most famous battles of the age. The sea had become more than a route for travel. It had become the foundation of power itself. Across northern Europe, floating armies were influencing politics, warfare, and the future of entire kingdoms. The final evolution of the floating army arrived in one of the most famous years of medieval history. The year was 1066. Along the Norwegian coast, preparations were underway for an invasion unlike anything earlier Viking generations could have imagined. Picture an immense armada gathering beside the sea. Longships crowd the water, Supplies are loaded aboard, warriors prepare weapons, commanders discuss strategy, thousands of men stand ready for a campaign that will carry them across the North Sea toward England. This was the fleet of Harald Hardrada. Historical sources describe roughly 300 ships supporting the expedition. The scale was extraordinary. Centuries earlier, Viking leaders had crossed the sea in small groups, searching for opportunity. Now entire armies moved together across international waters as a single military force. Everything traveled with them: warriors, weapons, food, commanders, plans, ambitions. The floating army had reached its ultimate form. Hardrada's campaign would eventually end in defeat at Stamford Bridge. Yet the invasion remains one of the clearest demonstrations of how far Viking military power had evolved. The fleet that crossed toward England represented generations of shipbuilding, organization, leadership, and experience. The Longship had begun as a tool of mobility. It became something far greater. It became logistics, it became strategy, it became political power, it became military power. Most importantly, it became the foundation of a system that allowed rulers to move armies farther and faster than many opponents believed possible. Throughout the Viking Age, kingdoms rose and fell, wars reshaped borders, rulers fought for crowns. Behind many of those events stood the same decisive advantage: the fleet. Without ships, there would have been raids. With ships, there were armies. With armies came invasions. And with invasions came a transformation that changed the history of Northern Europe forever. The Vikings did not simply build great ships. They built floating armies, and those armies changed the world.